Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are in the country, and welcome to our webinar today on ChooseWell. This is our third in a series of webinars we're presenting related to organizational well-being, wellness programs, and strategies in organizations. We're going to take a slightly different track in our webinar today. Hopefully a fun and entertaining and hopefully useful track looking at the organization as an entity itself, as an organic entity, and looking at the well-being of the organization. You know, more and more organizations are focused on wellness programs, looking at the physical and emotional well-being and wellness health of their individuals. And that there's a feeling that if we really enhance emotional and physical well-being of our employees, it will benefit both the employees and the organization as a whole in terms of profitability, saving money, and the overall kind of environment of the organization. Well, let's take that a step further and to compare wellness and the concept of wellness and health to the organization itself as an organic being, and to say what would it be like to try to understand the concepts that we've learned from wellness in terms of that organization as an organic entity and its well-being. That's the path we're going to choose to travel today, and hopefully some of it will relate and compare. It's a bit of an adventure. I think it's an adventure that some other thinkers and writers and organizational consultants have embarked on. And here's our contribution today. So welcome to the webinar. Wanted to quickly just introduce myself to you and where I work. I work in an organization called BizPsych. We are the organizational development arm or sister company of Minds and Associates. Minds and Associates is a national business psychology firm. In our division, we do specifically services that relate to the organizational development behavior of those employees in an organization that constitute its eventual well-being. So real quickly, in BizPsych, here's some of the services that we offer. At the top of the list, we do organizational cultural assessments. This is for organizations that are really interested in looking at their culture and how well their culture is lined up with the way they want it to be. And so we've devised an assessment that we evolved from a behavioral risk tool that really looks at culture and how the culture is functioning in the organization. We do a fair amount of leadership development in a variety of ways, either through training and training managers and leaders to individual programs. We have done a lot of change management as organizations grow, develop through their life cycle and through mergers and acquisitions. So helping organizations and folks understand and manage and navigate through the incredible rate of change process that we have in organizations. We will help organizations with strategic visioning. So from the beginning of forming a strategic plan to enacting and implementing that plan throughout the organization. We do executive coaching, clearly for top leaders in organizations, for C-level employees in an organization, as well as throughout the organization for managers, for supervisors, even at times if there's some correctional coaching that's required for a problem in developing a leader who may not be managing as well or effectively as they can. So we do a fair amount of executive coaching in BizPsych. Occasionally we get the opportunity to do breakthrough change projects when an organization decides that they want a drastic change. They may be completely reorganizing how they do business. They may need a transformation in the organization, and we have facilitated some of the process and work with organizations in that breakthrough change process. We clearly do team building, team assessments. Unfortunately or fortunately, we often enter into workplaces where people are not playing well and sharing in the sandbox, as they say. And so we typically, if requested, will do a team assessment or a facility or work group assessment to determine what may be contributing, what may the causes be of either folks not getting along or working effectively together or working effectively with the organization, and then to determine interventions for that work group from the assessment and what it tells us. We certainly do a lot of employee training and development. Today is just one example of the types of training that we do. We do on-site training in soft skills, in management development and training, things like time management, a number of different things. And we do that on-site. We're doing more and more webinars like this and trying to meet the needs of businesses and developing their people, which we certainly see as a good thing. And then finally, we facilitate a conflict mediation process, either a contained process, so we offer most of our client companies a certain number of hours as part of their EAP service to do some conflict resolution, up to longer and more involved conflict mediation. So again, we run into situations where people have actually stopped speaking with each other, and you can imagine the impact that has on a work group or a team when there are two individuals who aren't speaking or certainly not working optimally together. It impacts those individuals, it impacts their productivity, but it impacts everyone around them, which a lot of times they're less cognizant of. So we offer conflict mediation both for our client companies and for retail customers. That's who we are in BizPsych. That's a little bit of our orientation for this webinar in attempting to take the concept of wellness and extend it to the life of an organization. So let's jump into what we're calling organizational well-being. Now, I'm a fan of looking at definitions and looking things up when we're using language, and so I thought it would be probably appropriate to look up well-being. Unfortunately, a lot of the definitions that came up were circular definitions that say things like, well, the state of well-being of an individual, or those kind of circular definitions. So I did find one in Merriam-Webster that wasn't circular, that I think we can use for our purposes throughout this webinar today. And this definition of well-being is the state of being happy, healthy, or prosperous, and welfare. So we're looking at welfare not as an entitlement or benefit as we do in the country, but the welfare of the organization. And I think this is a pertinent term to use in terms of what is the welfare of the organization and how does that extend to the people that work in it. So here's what we're going to use as our platform today, is the different aspects of this definition from Merriam-Webster. I wanted to extend, we also looked up the new definition Pinnacle Wikipedia, and when we put in well-being, it actually just linked to this term quality of life. So it didn't have a definition for well-being, and it saw quality of life as being the same thing, which is kind of interesting. So we included this because I think there's some aspects of this definition that we can use as well. So the Wikipedia definition: the built environment, the physical and mental health, education, recreation, and leisure time and social belonging. So some different concepts there to apply to the organization. We'll try to apply them as they're appropriate. So again, we're going to use this as a springboard today for our discussion about organizational well-being. So let's go back to the dictionary and pull these apart and use the first aspect of the definition, which is happiness. Now here's one that is probably not completely intuitive as we apply it to the organization. We all have a good sense of what happiness means. Not always sure how to get there, but we have some sense of what it means for individuals. But what would that mean for an organization? So once again, I had to search a little bit and Actually, the second definition is going to be useful for us or usable. And the second definition in Webster of happiness or happy is notably fitting, effective, or well-adjusted. So there's some things we can look at in terms of an organization. Is the organization fitting, effective, or well-adjusted? Now we wanted to engage you in thinking a little bit about how we would determine some of these aspects when we're talking about an organization. So the first question that we'd like you just to think about is when we describe the cadre of services that organizational consultants perform for organizations, which type of organizational service do you think would suggest that we would use to determine the happiness of an organization? Again, sort of a different concept, not something we think of. So we could utilize executive coaching to determine happiness. We could utilize team building. We could utilize the organizational and cultural assessment type of tool. We could do employee training and development, or we could do conflict resolution. So which of these services do you think we might utilize to determine happiness? And of course, this is a question that we made up, so we get to answer it. And if you were on track with thinking that the organizational cultural assessment would be maybe the best determinant of organizational happiness, then you are in line with our thinking. So we really thought that the organizational cultural assessment was a way to determine happiness. And when we're thinking about the happiness of an individual, your happiness, my happiness, we think, well, am I happy in my family? Am I happy in my job? Am I happy contributing in my community? Is my life going down the path that I want it to? Is my life meeting my goals, if I set goals? And so herein we can look at the culture of the organization as a way of looking at the happiness of the organization. So the first thing we think about when we think about an organization is that it has to have a mission. It has to have a vision. It has values, things that they stand for. Most organizations, at least medium-sized to larger organizations, have gone through the drill of creating mission statements, vision, values. Even small organizations, hopefully individual businesses, people in business for themselves, have a mission, vision, and value. In a larger organization or a medium-sized organization, what's important in terms of determining happiness and what we try to measure in our cultural assessment is, are those mission, vision, and values, are they communicated to people? Do they make sense? Are they just words on the page, or do they mean something? Do they stand for something that that individual can relate to in terms of their day-to-day jobs and how that fits in with the profit or the customer of the organization? So really important in terms of culture. Do people know it, understand it? Does it make sense to them? Once we have the mission, vision, and values, what's the next step? Then we formulate a strategic plan, how those mission, vision, and values are going to be implemented in the work of the organization. So what is that strategic plan? Has it been developed in a way that's relevant? Is it useful? Is it applied? Do people know it? So if we've spent a lot of time creating vision, value statements and then rolled out a strategic plan, is it something that we're actually going to implement? Or again, is it something that looks good on paper and we have it, we can roll it out when the consultant comes in to visit the organization? Or is it something that is live and breathing? In our organization, we do at least semi-annual or quarterly evaluation of that strategic plan to say, are we on track? Do we need to change it? Is it working? Is it correct? Does it help us do our business? And if it helps us engage in our business in a more efficient way, then our culture is in line. So we really want to talk about, in terms of culture, alignment. Is our culture in alignment with where we want that business to be? So just like the individual, we want to know that our life is somehow flowing down the pathway of what we want to accomplish, of our goals. in the organization, are we all rowing in the same direction? Do we have the same knowledge base? Do we know what we stand for and the way we're going to get jobs done? Alignment, I think, is an essential concept for us to look at in organizations. When we do team building, that term has become almost frightening to most people as it's gotten utilized, overemployed, and mocked on TV. So we a lot of times look at the team alignment building instead of just team building. So in the organization, happiness might be, in general, is there job satisfaction? And is there a lot of turnover in the organization? Or is that turnover in alignment with what we would expect it to be? So in most workplaces, there's going to be some turnover. In our modern society, people change jobs and careers up to 7 times in a lifetime as an average. So people are not going to stay in their jobs. Is that turnover what we would expect? If we're running a call center, we might expect a higher rate of turnover than we do in certain other departments or other jobs. So is that turnover in alignment? Do folks know, if you ask them to articulate what makes this organization unique? And so I don't think it matters whether you're working for a municipal government or if you're working for a nonprofit or a largely held public company. Do we know what makes us unique? That every business has to set itself apart, and do we know that? Do the employees know that? Is our organization a learning organization? So obviously the writer Peter Senge talked about the learning organization and what it takes for an organization to be alive and organic and to be ever growing, and for the organization itself to be constantly evolving. So those individuals within it are learning, and the organization itself becomes what Senge calls a learning organization. Is there always quality improvement? 99% of employees want to have quality in their job. They want to know that there's quality, and that quality can always be improved, and that's what motivates us to do a good and an increasingly better job all the time. So again, if the organization is happy, it's going to be learning, it's going to be improving, there's going to be movement forward. And then finally, is there balance between the individual and the company? So we want to have a culture where people feel that they'll do what it takes to make the organization successful. We want people to give to the organization. What can I do for the organization to make us all successful? At the same time, then, does that organization respect the needs and the balance of the individual, that people have lives, that they're not part of the machinery, that they are a resource, but they're a human resource? And so do we have respect for the individuals and their needs? And does the organization, at the same time as asking people to give their all for the company, does the company also back people up? Does it have respect for people? Are people rewarded? Do they feel like they're trusted? Are they treated fairly? And are we supporting the growth of the individual and the balance of their lives as well? So all of these are just little flags that I invite you to think about in terms of your organizational happiness. And maybe you can even develop your own scale of how happy are we, determined by these different elements. Another question for you to think about, since we're talking about happiness, and we're talking about the happiness of the organization, in terms of people, is it the organization's responsibility to make employees happy? I think there's probably been a lot of different thought about this question. Are organizations responsible to make people happy? So you may answer this in a variety of different ways or have different thoughts about it. Our position is that it's really not the organization's responsibility to make people happy, that the organization, in some ways, just like a family or a marriage, can't make people happy, that there is a lot that's left up to the individual. But in the Wikipedia definition, where they talk about what's the built environment, it is absolutely the organization's responsibility to provide a safe, constructive environment where people, are able and enhanced in succeeding in their jobs. So they know what their goals are, they have the resources to accomplish their goals. They are able to be productive and they're able to thrive in that environment. So that has some to do with that balance, but it also has to do with the job itself. And so the organization can't make anyone actually motivated or make someone satisfied or happy, but the organization has the absolute responsibility to create a built environment that provides the safety and the opportunity for people to accomplish their goals. Hence all of the work and focus that we have on things like harassment and violence in the workplace and safety initiatives, especially in safety-sensitive industries. So we have to provide safety for people. We have to provide an environment where they can accomplish what we've asked them to accomplish, and that most people, when they feel like they can get the results that we ask of them, it leads to a great deal of satisfaction. And we certainly encounter a lot of organizations where people feel distressed and feel unhappy, and it's not just because they're not getting paid enough money. It's because they really don't feel that they have the resources. They may not know what their roles are. They may not know what their goals are. We've done projects where people are extremely unhappy because they don't have any sense of what the vision or the goals of either their department or the organization are. So again, these things really serve to create happiness in the organization. So I wanted to just address this since we're talking about happiness. We can't make people happy, but we have the absolute responsibility in organizations to provide the correct environment. Let's move to looking at the second part of the definition of well-being, and that was health. Again, a little bit of searching around on the internet furnishes a definition, this time from Wikipedia, that health is the level of functional or metabolic efficiency of a living being. In humans, it's the general condition of a person's mind, body, and spirit, usually meaning to be free from illness, injury, or pain. So that's good health or healthy. I think we can probably grasp on to the idea of the organization having some kind of functional or metabolic efficiency, so the functional or metabolic efficiency of the organization. Now this is specifically in humans, it's the general condition of a person's mind, body, and spirit. Now we're going to have to reach a little further to say what's the organization's, the condition of the organization's mind, body, and spirit. So we're going to try to, again, use this just as a springboard to look at different aspects of the organization. Our next question for you just to think about, since we're going to ask this about each of these definitions, so which organizational service might be primary in promoting the health of the organization? So if we're talking about health, and we're looking at what that definition just described to us about health, which one of these organizational types of services would assess or help us look at health? So again, the organizational cultural assessment, employee training and development, conflict mediation, team building, or leadership development. So this could be, there could be a lot of multiple thoughts about this. Obviously, organizational cultural assessment, if we're talking about happiness, could give us some idea of health as well. But we wanted to use this as a springboard specifically to talk about number E. So our answer is E, that leadership in the organization is the vehicle to provide health. And from the top of the organizational leadership, down throughout the hierarchy, that leadership is really important in assessing and determining the health of the organization. In all the many, many polls that have been done that ask about what makes people feel happy or healthy in the organization, what determines their satisfaction, money comes up, salary comes up, but always at the very top is relationship to my manager. So the leadership and the amount of guidance, direction, and support that I get from above is consistently important in satisfaction type of surveys with employees. So specifically the relationship to the manager and people feeling rewarded and people feeling appreciated and valued. In the definition, it talks some about physical health. So we just talked about that. What's the environment? And that could be the physical layout. It could be the social layout of the organization. But that physical health we can look at in terms of the structure and the systems of the organization. Another theorist that we utilize a lot in our work is Elia Goldratt, who wrote books about constraint theory. There are other writers who talk about constraint theory. But once again, most employees want to get effective results. They want to know that if they're given a job assignment or that they're contributing to the organization, that they're able to do that and produce effective results. Many times when we're called in to do some kind of team assessment where people are not getting along very well, there's a lot of distress and complaint, we want to look at some of the systems that are supporting employees' happiness, and that rather than only focusing on the conflicts or the emotional, psychological issues that are coming up between employees, if there are constraints in the workflow, this leads to people not getting along. So it's not always about having bad people or that people's morale is just impacting their relationships, but that sometimes constraints in getting the job done lead people to fight amongst themselves. And there are a lot of certainly animal experiments that have supported this. So does the environment, do the systems really allow a workflow that allows people to feel results? And if there are constraints in that workflow, you can expect that people are going to have more conflict and more distress. So we really want to look at the physical health of the environment. And what about then, what does mental health mean when we're talking about organizational health? Do people feel a sense of accomplishment? So again, that may relate back to the systems supporting them. But are the processes, is the communication in the organization such that people feel that they can interact in a way that's effective and to get their jobs done? Can they communicate upward and downward? I'll tell you that in the assessments that we do, 99% of the assessments, no matter whether we're talking about a work team, a work group, a facility, a leadership team, I would say that I can't think of a project that we've done where communication hasn't come up as an area of improvement or sometimes an area of dysfunction or distress. So communication is what really is going to help support the mental health of the organization. How are people's relationships? Do they have input going up the chain? Is there effective communication coming down the chain? There's another writer that you're probably familiar with, Patrick Lencioni, who wrote 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And he talks about trust being an essential component in a team, in an effective team. And the second tier is that people are able to engage in effective conflict resolution. And I support this wholeheartedly from my work with organizations, that in teams where people can disagree and they can have conflict and resolve that conflict, there's a feeling of much greater health than when people have to hold in conflict and then it goes underground and all kinds of ill health results. Is there accountability? So again, in the projects that we do, one of the complaints often is that there's not accountability, that people feel, unfortunately they always feel it about others, that others aren't being held accountable. So do we have accountability? Do we hold ourselves accountable? Are we able to hold our peers accountable? Are managers able to hold effective accountability for results? And then there's been a lot that's talked about in terms of employee engagement. Are we as an organization able to really engage people? Do they feel that they're engaged in doing their jobs, in the work, in the progress and the success of the organization? So again, if we're looking at the mental health of the organization, we're looking at some of these aspects of social interaction, communication, engagement. Another theorist that we have utilized a lot in our work is a guy named Elliot Jacques, who wrote books about what he calls the requisite organization. And his theory is pretty prescribed and specific and doesn't apply neatly necessarily to all organizations. But most organizations we work with have some kind of hierarchy. There is leadership that somehow moves down to managers and then to supervisors and to frontline producers. And so when there's a hierarchy, is it designed clearly and effectively? Do people know where their role is in the organization? And are there realistic expectations of folks at all levels? In Jacques' model, the frontline producers, they are expected to come in and just do their job to the best of their ability. So they don't have to be leaders. They are expected to do their job to the best of their ability, which is what he expects really at all levels of the hierarchy. But obviously there's different requirements as we move up that hierarchy of forward thinking and complex thinking and those kind of things. So he talks a lot about the importance of having basic trust and fairness. People feel like they're treated fairly, paid fairly, and then they engage in trust in the organization, and then they do the best that they can. And they're also expected to not engage in dysfunctional behaviors. That's one of the expectations in the requisite organization. So that means that we need to be able to choose the right people for the right jobs, have people in the right positions, and to be really clear that we really are choosing people for the right reasons. So this is a big quagmire in terms of promoting. The history of most organizations is that we really move people up the chain when they're dedicated and they work hard and they are good at their jobs and they're effective. We're going to move them up the chain, but they may really not be effective managers and leaders of others. So can we be a little more intentional about choosing people for the right reasons, promoting people into leadership positions who have leadership qualities? I think I've talked about, again, we need to pay people fairly, and we need to have, in Jacques' view, this hierarchy clear enough that there are not a lot of gaps in what's expected, people working at different levels. Now, the reality is most organizations that we work with, especially smaller organizations, you're going to have working managers and working supervisors. So they're, in Jacques' view, there's a gap where that manager is doing level 1 work when in fact their primary job is doing level 3 work. I don't think we're going to be able to eliminate that. And for all the work he did, Jacques is not able to eliminate that. We need to see where that makes sense and where it stops making sense, where people are filling in gaps that really don't work to the best interest of the organization. And in that way, we need to challenge the idea of multi-hatting and multitasking, that we have considered it a value, that people are great multitaskers and that they can wear multiple hats in the organization and do all kinds of things. And the more we've studied this, the more we've recognized that multitasking really is not an effective and efficient way of getting work done. That the reality is we really, as human beings, can only do one thing at a time. Our brain only allows us to focus really on one thing at a time. So when we think that we're driving the car, talking on the phone, and eating a sandwich, we're really only doing one of those things at a time. And that's why I tend to sometimes miss exit or drop pieces of my sandwich in my lap or have ineffective conversations if I'm doing all of those 3 things. So again, I don't want to take this too far, but in terms of looking at leadership as being part of the hierarchy of the organization, how is our leadership structure and how is that hierarchy designed that's effective and serves people's results and clarity? Another huge area of complaint that we get when we're doing organizational assessments is if people feel like their roles are not clear. What is the authority of the supervisor? One sort of pet peeve in particular organizations that have team lead positions where people are in some quote-unquote lead role, but they have no authority whatsoever, this can become a very undermining and confusing sort of role in the organization. So just want you to use this when we're talking about the health of the organization as determined by leadership, and that there is a hierarchy in most organizations. How effectively is that designed? And if there are areas where authority and roles really are not clear, it often serves to the detriment of the health of the organization. Then lastly, just in terms of health, it's good to look at teamwork and how much does the organization allow, enable, and facilitate proactive social support. So when we're talking about stress management, we've focused to some degree away from stress, which is a negative concept, and stress, focusing on stress invites more stress. We're talking more and more about emotional resilience. And when we're talking about the emotional resilience of an individual, is there a sense of social resilience that we can provide in our teams where people really are able to provide the support, the resources for one another, and the more that we're able to weave kind of a fabric of strong social support and teamwork, again, the healthier our organization is. If we have healthy teams within our organization, we're going to have a healthy organization, and those two work hand in hand. If the organization itself feels unhealthy, we're going to tend to find teams that have a lot of lack of alignment, bickering, conflict. Conversely, if we have a lot of teams, or even some teams that are dysfunctional, strong word, and have a lot of unresolved conflict, and where they're really not in alignment, it impacts the health of the organization. So again, this is something that, from our perspective, needs to be taken seriously, as opposed to, you know, the family model of thinking of, oh, Uncle Earl is he's just kind of crazy and drinks too much, and but he doesn't really affect our family. When we have family gatherings, Uncle Earl does affect our family. And so what can we do about that? Certainly in the workplace, if we have teams that are not working effectively, we have the opportunity to move forward. Let's move forward then and look at the third part of the definition, which had to do with prosperity. So this is a great term, and the one that's probably the easiest of all the ones that we've talked about to apply to the organization. So here's the definition, again, Webster definition number 2 of prosperous. So it's A, marked by success or economic well-being. That's pretty easy to get. And B, enjoying vigorous and healthy growth. So both of those, I think, are very easy concepts now to apply to organizational well-being. I had to include just one other part of the definition from Wikipedia that said that in Buddhism, prosperity is viewed with an emphasis on collectivism and spirituality. So I just had to throw that in for the variety of it. My partner here, Marcia Kent, and I devised a program that maybe some of you have experienced called the currency of collaboration. So when in this Wikipedia definition they talk about collectivism, if we can talk about collaboration as that same concept, that we collaborate and that there truly is a value, there is a currency, that there is a clear mark towards the prosperity of the organization when there's collaboration within the organization. Spirituality just might mean what's the spirit of the organization. Do we have, does the organization have, again, a clear mission and vision, and the culture is really the spirit of the organization. So let's look just a little bit at prosperity when we're talking about organizational well-being. So our last question that we want you to kind of consider is, when we're talking about the organizational development services that we could employ, what might be focused on to provide prosperity in the organization. So we could provide change management, executive coaching, team building, employee training and development. Those are just the ones that we picked. And so really, do none of these determine or impact prosperity, or do all of them? And so certainly, probably clear to most of you that our choice is that all of these, in this case, really impact prosperity, that the prosperity of the organization is determined by its ability to effect effective change, and that utilizing coaching to promote leadership and the health of the organization contributes to prosperity, that team building, effective teams, as we talked about, and certainly the training and developing employees in the organization all have an important impact on prosperity. Now, I just want to say that of all of these concepts we talked about, happiness, health, and prosperity as being three aspects of organizational well-being, probably prosperity is the easiest or the clearest to see. That really most organizations exist to be either profitable or sustainable. So if we're talking about a nonprofit, at the very least, they have to keep the doors open. They want to be sustainable. They want to be creating something that lasts. Or for most profit organizations, profitability is essential. So this is a primary driver for most organizations. So we wanted to circle back to this so that we could be very clear that when we're talking about organizational well-being, prosperity can be absolute or it can be, and that a lot of traditional business sense would really look at this as the well-being of the organization. Is it prosperous? And I like the term prosperous as opposed to just profitable. So that means that if we are considering well-being as related to an organization, we're going to have to make the case, and hopefully we've made it to some effective degree today in this webinar, that happiness and health, that those aspects of well-being are essential contributors to prosperity. So in kind of the real world of organizations creating wellness programs or well-being programs for individuals, this really is in the spirit of the prosperity of the organization. If the individuals in the organization prosper, it's going to contribute to the prosperity of the organization. In our case, that it's essential for prosperity for an organization to have the aspects of happiness that we outlined in terms of alignment and strategic plan and vision, and the aspects of health in terms of good leadership, effective hierarchy, systems, and policies. Just to share another theory that we use a lot, there are several theories that talk about development of an organization as being similar to the development of human beings. So Ishaq Aziz has written a book called Corporate Life Cycles, and so he uses that term in particular. We've used that theory extensively in terms of the lifespan of the organization. And in Aziz's work in particular, he actually takes the organization all the way through the lifespan from conception to death, and what contributes to death. In every organization, there may well be eventual death. And so just like an individual is conceived and then is born and is a child, and then an adolescent moves to adulthood, moves to midlife and seniority, and eventually old age, retirement, all those things, that an organization follows the same path. And the purpose of looking at this is that if we look at the stage of organizations, be it a nonprofit or a profit organization, from the conception and the birth of that organization, moving through its lifespan, at each point there are different requirements. So we have different requirements of an infant in terms of nutrition and what's good for that infant, and how the parent contributes to that development. into childhood and adolescence. Very different things are required to support a teenager than a young adult, or maybe than a child. So certainly in Aziz's formula, at each stage he looks at what contributes to moving to the next state in the best way that it can. And there's some very edifying and complex types of focuses that we can have at each stage to really promote that well-being of or development of the organization. So does prosperity in an organization equal well-being? In many ways, I think, in terms of if the lifeblood of, or the ultimate purpose of most organizations is profitability and or sustainability, and that if they are profitable and sustainable, they are, i.e., then prosperous. And if they're prosperous, is that equated with well-being, which means prosperous, happy, and healthy? And I would like to conjecture that all of these things are important, and that we can look at the organization, again, as an organic being and look at what contributes to the happiness, health, and prosperity of the organization. So in conclusion, in this adventure of organizational well-being, we want to really look to the reality that as organizations create more programs to look at individual wellness and health, and that they create these models that impact cost, it also makes sense for us to look at the overall organization's well-being, the components of health, happiness, and prosperity of the organization, so that just like wellness being a preventative program, that we're not waiting for problems to happen, that we're trying to anticipate health and create more health so that there are less costly interventions, and really they're costly in terms of money, and they're costly in terms of individuals' happiness and life satisfaction. So we're stressing prevention, and we're looking at things like, you know, obesity and smoking, diabetes, and all these things. What can we do to prevent hospital stays and costly medical interventions? Isn't that similar with organizations, that if we can look at health, happiness, and prosperity, and how that we can promote those aspects in the organization, are we actually streamlining cost, helping productivity, and contributing to the prosperity of the organization? So this is our invitation to you in today's webinar, to really think about the concepts that we've presented, to look at your organization as you, if you can, as an entity, and to say, where does the well-being of my organization stand in terms of those different, all the different aspects that we talked about: leadership and alignment and vision and values, and you know, practical strategic plans, sort of all the elements that we talked about. Can you really use this as a way of assessing your organization, where it stands in terms of its well-being, and how might you consider impacting the overall well-being of your organization? Are there some aspects from what we talked about today that you could utilize to really help prevent disease and ill health in the organization and eventual death and decline? Certainly, when I look at the organizational services that we listed for BizPsych, really all of those services are in the spirit of contributing to the health of the organization. I wanted to have a catchy quote, and I'm hoping that some of you might be able to send me a catchier quote, but we did find one quote from Joel Bennett, who has an organization called Organization Wellness and Learning Systems. Joel's done a lot of work in the critical incident stress management field, and you know, he, in one of his writings, says there's a positive feedback loop between individual health and overall organizational health. So there are some other wacky people other than us who are looking at organizational health as an entity, and certainly Joel Bennett has done a lot in the work of helping individuals, but also really organizations, and looking at this concept of organizational wellness. And so we want to leave you with that bridge and that invitation to use this information in some way that can help you assess the health of your organization. Here are just some of the resources that we've referred to today in case you want to look into some of these theories. I don't think I've listed everything, but would be happy to give you more references for anything that I've quoted. Here are just a few. So Goldratt in the constraint theory, and then Jacques in the requisite organization, Aziz in the corporate life cycles, and obviously Peter Senge, which a lot of you are familiar with. And so we want to just leave you here at the end with the opportunity to email me personally or us at BizPsych if you have any questions, any follow-up, anything that either made some great sense to you and you'd like to explore further, or didn't make sense and you'd like to ask questions about it. We certainly invite you to contact us with any follow-up from this webinar. Also, if you want a copy of these slides, we're happy to send those to you as well. These are posted, as is this webinar, on our website at BizPsych and Minds and Associates. So you have that available, but if you want the slides, be happy to follow up and send them to you and answer any questions that you may have. So I want to thank you again very much for joining this presentation today, or if you're listening to it on our web in the future, whenever that may be that you've enjoyed it. For those of you that are listening today, we want to invite you to our fourth and final webinar in our 2012 series, ChooseWell, and that will be on worry-free finances. That will be on Wednesday, November 14th, from 10 to 11 Mountain Standard Time, and so that's on worry-free finances. Our financial consultant helps to identify the simplest ways to improve your financial position in preparation for the holiday season in 2013. When it comes to your finances, it's important to know how to choose well. So once again, thank you. I hope that this information gave you a different perspective, a different way of looking at the organization and at this concept of wellness and well-being. We invite you to join us in the future, and thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.